Okay, so this is it. This is the last video I'm going to do on Irradiance Particles. We're finally there. Okay, to finish this off, I'm going to show you how to use Irradiance Particles with Caustics in Mental Ray to combine the two, because Irradiance Particles can't do Caustics by itself, even though it can do indirect illumination. So we can actually activate Caustics in Mental Ray and use it in combination with Irradiance Particles. So let me show you how to do that. Let's open up an example scene here, and the scene we're looking for is called IP Caustics Start. Let's open that one up. It's a pretty simple scene. Should look pretty familiar to you. If I do a preview render, this is what I have. Very simple room. We have a dim area light on top, the only light in our scene. Then we have the pedestal with a sphere on top. So let's go to the second camera view that I set up for us over here. And if we do another render preview closer up, we can see what we have, a simple sphere. What I want to do is use that light source in my room to create a caustic effect and create some caustics here with this sphere. Right now, however, the material in the sphere is not ideal for caustics. So let's go ahead and start to set up our caustics here. What I'm going to do is come up here. This is the only light in my scene, this area light on the ceiling. I'm going to open up its PPG here and go to the Photon tab. Let me lock down that PPG as well. As you can see, we have a caustics parameter here. Let's go ahead and turn that on. We can change the color of the energy here. We can also change the intensity. It's pretty low right now at 10,000, which means the effect probably won't be visible. We also have a very low number of photons here, only 10,000 caustic photons. We can increase that later. For now, for preview purposes, so it renders out faster, we'll keep it at only 10,000. I'm going to collapse that PPG because I don't want to make any changes now. I'll do that later. The next thing I need to do is, let me go to my second camera view here, make this sphere into a sort of glass-like material. It needs to be a glass-like material in this case so that it can refract light and create a nice caustic effect. So let's go ahead and do that. With the sphere selected, what I'm going to do is go ahead and go over here to material and apply an architectural material to it. And now we're going to make some changes to the shader. Let's go ahead and take the color here, knock that all the way down to black. And let's take the transparency and reflection over here. And let's turn the transparency up. It has to be totally transparent. And we're not going to give it any glossiness. Now for the index of refraction, I'm going to go with a value of 1.52. Why am I doing that? Well, I was doing a Google search for different refraction indices of objects and materials. And I found that a very common type of glass has that index of refraction. Of course, you can use any index of refraction you like. Okay. For the reflectivity, I'll leave it at default. All these values look pretty good. The only thing I'm going to do is come down here to the BRDF and switch from the manual mode to this automatic mode, which will use the index of refraction up here, 1.52, to determine the BRDF of the shader. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'm also going to go to the additional options tab here, and by default it has the visible area light highlights turned off. I want to go ahead and uncheck that so it turns that back on. That way I can see my visible area light highlights reflecting off the shader, which will look nicer. Let me close that PPG and let me render again. Okay, so there's our glass-like shader. What we're going to do is create a caustic effect for the bottom of that there. Alright, so let me go ahead and close that right there. The next step is to be able to create this object here, this glass sphere, into an object that can go ahead and cast caustic effects. To do that, we're going to select this super duper sphere. Very original name, I know. Hit F3 on the keyboard to open up a little mini explorer, and we're going to open up the visibility PPG over here. Switch over to the rendering tab, and down here under the caustic parameter sets here, we're going to see a caster parameter that's off by default. We want to go ahead and check that on. Let's turn that off. Now this sphere can go ahead and cast caustics into our scene, which is great. It's actually not going to shoot out caustic photons. It's going to create the caustic effect in the scene, but the caustic photons are going to come from the light that was on the ceiling that we tweaked the parameters for a little moment ago. Okay, now with that done, we can actually go ahead and turn on caustics now. So let's go over to the renderer options. I'm going to pin that down because I'm going to need that PPG quite a bit, of course. And what you want to do is go over to the Photon Global tab, and you can see how you can switch from Global Illumination and Final Gather to Irradiance Particles. Now if you remember, when we switch to Irradiance Particles as the algorithm and we go back to Final Gathering, it's grayed out. Mental Ray won't let us use it because you can't use Final Gathering and Irradiance Particles at the same time. Same thing with global illumination. It's grayed out as well because we can't use GI with irradiance particles at the same time. But you can see that caustics is still enabled. We can turn it on and off. Of course, that's because caustics actually works with irradiance particles if you wanted to. So what I'm going to do for the moment is I'm going to make sure irradiance particles is off. I don't want to turn it on. And I'm going to go to GI and Caustics, and I'm going to turn on Caustics. Okay. So let's go ahead and do a preview render here. See what we have. Okay, so we can see a slight caustic effect. If you see these speckles of light on the top of the pedestal here, that's the actual caustic effect. Now, to make the caustic effect a little bit more visible to you and make things a little bit easier, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to the PPG from the light in the ceiling, and I'm going to change the color of the caustics to a red. That way it's more visible. Now I'll go ahead and re-render that out. It's going to go ahead and emit photons down here. There it goes. Okay, so now we can see there's this pinkish color down here. That's the caustic effect. It's causing that red color, of course, because I changed the color to red. And we can actually increase the intensity of that caustic effect. So why don't we go ahead and do that? I'm just going to max out the slider to 100,000. See what that gives us. There we go. That's a pretty bright caustic effect. And right now I want it bright on purpose. That way I can tweak and fine tune the caustic effect, and then I can tone the intensity back down. But this allows me to see it a lot easier. Okay, what we need to do to fix the caustic effect is change some of the caustic settings. So let me collapse this PPG. I'm also going to lock down that render preview so every time I make a change or move anything in my scene, it doesn't start updating like crazy. First thing I'm going to do is increase the caustic accuracy all the way up to 1,000. And for the photon search radius, let's go ahead and use a pretty small value. See, if we go to something like, say, 5, which is actually a pretty small value, let's re-render that again. What happens is that the caustic effect is just, the radius is too big. The photon search radius is too big. If you notice, the top of the pedestal and pretty much everything in our scene has a sort of pinkish hue to it. That's because that caustic search radius is just way too big. So we're going to use a smaller value, something like 0.5. And every scene will be different. That's one thing to keep note of. There's no magic photon search radius number that works for every scene. Okay, so now we can see the caustic effect pretty nicely. We don't have the speckling of light like we had before, and it looks much better now. Okay, excellent. Now for these other settings, I'm going to leave these settings like the photon merge factor at the default is fine. Also my sharpness filter, I can change it from a box, a cone, and a Gaussian filter. I like to use the cone as it seems to look a lot better than any of the other filters. And the size, the default size of 1.1 is pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and leave it on that. You can see you can change the caustic photon color here as well, which I'm not going to do. And if we go back to the photon global tab, you'll notice that now we have these photon volume accuracy parameters, which we can change. I'm not going to go ahead and change any of those. Those default settings are perfectly fine as they are. You also notice down here we can save out a photon map file that it saves out as a pH map or photon map. So we can actually save the caustic map as well as an Irradiance Particles map, which is saved separately. See, the Irradiance Particles map is an IP map. Let me go ahead and turn that off. Okay, so now that I have the caustic effect turned on, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to go back to GI and Caustics, and I'm going to disable Caustics to turn it off. I'm going to go back to Irradiance Particles, and I'm going to turn that on. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up the Irradiance Particles, and then we'll go back and add the caustic effect on top of the Irradiance Particles. So this is going to be pretty simple. Let me knock down the race to something like 32. I'm just going with preview-like settings so we can render out really fast. I'm going to turn off environment. Don't need that. Go back to the Photon Global tab, and let's take the density down to something really low, like 0.05, so we don't get too many photons, or importans I should say, in our scene. Let's also increase the diffuse bounces to about something like 2. Will work out pretty good. I'm going to open up my script editor down here. Let me go to diagnostics, turn on information, of course. Let me clear this out, and let's do a render preview here. There's our importans. And there it is. Okay, let's see how many importans that was. That was 14,000. just over 14,000, which is a pretty decent number, but I'm sure we can go with a little bit more. So let's try something like zero point 0.1 instead. Clear that out. Render again. There it goes. About 25,000 portons, as you can see down here in the script editor. 25,289 portons, which is going to work out pretty good. I don't have to go too crazy with that number. I'm going to leave it at that. It's going to work out pretty decent. Okay, so it's wrapping up here. Okay, there we go. Not much of a visible difference there, but that's okay. Let's go back to the Irradiance Particles tab over here. And for indirect passes, should we add an indirect pass? I'm going to go ahead and say probably no. I'm not going to add an indirect pass. I don't really think that we need it. What I am going to do instead is I'm going to increase the intensity of the area light in my room, because right now it just seems to me like it's a bit dark. So let's go to the Explorer here, open up the PPG for our light box. Oh, actually I already had a PPG open for the light box. Silly me. Okay, let me go over to the multiplier here for the portal light, and let's double the intensity from 50 to 100. See what that gives us. Okay, that's a much nicer, brighter image. I'm going to say I'm happy with that and leave it at a multiplier of 100. Looks pretty decent. Okay, so we have the IP map already pretty much computed for us. There it is. What I'm going to do is increase the amount of rays. So let's go with something much higher. Let's go with about, I'm thinking 200. Yeah, I think I'll just go with 200, and all these other settings look perfectly fine. You know what? I might increase the diffuse bounces to 4. And let's re-render that out. Now it's up to 33,000 irradiance particles. Of course it increased because we increased the diffuse bounces from 2 to 4, so we get more importons fired into our scene. Okay, so that took about 2 minutes right there to render out. Not much of a difference though, to be honest with you, so I don't know if it was worth the added rendering time, even though it was only 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, now that I've already calculated the radiance particles, I don't need to calculate them over and over and over again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn rebuild off just to save me some time. Okay, and now what we're going to do is go over to GI and Caustics, and we're going to turn on Caustics. So let's turn Caustics back on, and let's do a refresh here for the render. And what you'll notice is that it's not going to calculate any importons or anything. It's just going to shoot the photons from the light, and that's it. And there's our caustic effect down there. It's a little bit bright and of course looks fake, but this is of course for illustrative purposes, just to show you what's going on. That's why I changed the color from the default to this reddish color so it can be more visible. So there's our caustic effect. So as you can see, you can combine caustics with irradiance particles, which of course is extremely helpful considering the fact that irradiance particles can't handle any type of indirect specular light bouncing in the scene, which is what caustics is for. So there you go. That's how you can mix and match caustics with irradiance particles. And there's no difference here. There's nothing that changes. The caustics continues to work exactly how it's always worked traditionally, which means that you can change the refractive index of the glass shader here, and the caustics will react and act accordingly. Okay, so you can use caustics the same way that you've used caustics before with global illumination, or just caustics by themselves. Just use it with irradiance particles, mix and match and combine the two together. Okay, so there you go. That's pretty much going to do it for caustics and irradiance particles here. We're going to end this here and finish up this chapter. And in the next one, we're going to dive into other aspects of mental ray and keep on going here because there's still a lot to cover. Okay, so I'll see you in the next video.